Hi. I'm going to tell you a story that sounds like a fairy tale. In 2000, after graduating from college at the age of 21, I moved to New York City to work as a journalist. I got a job at the New York Daily News based on the strength of freelance writing clips I had written while in school. I had no journalism degree and had never done an unpaid internship. I could have not afforded to work for free and would have found the expectation to do so insulting. I graduated expecting to find a job, and I did, in an entry-level position that paid $40,000 a year. I could live in New York City in relative comfort, having found a one-bedroom apartment in Astoria for $900 a month. I didn't know it at the time, but I had begun my adult life at the tail end of a fantasy, one which rapidly transformed into a nightmare of dashed expectations and diminished returns. I lived in a New York, in an America that no longer exists. I was one of the last generation to begin work in a creative profession as a member of the middle class. Today, my $40,000 entry-level job has been converted into an unpaid internship. My apartment in Astoria, which was $900 in 2000, rents for $2,500 in 2015. Cost of living has skyrocketed while pay has plunged, often to nothing at all. This transformation began while I was still working at the Daily News. As what was viewed to be a temporary media recession hit in 2001, I watched as over a third of my colleagues were laid off. Those of us who remained received no raises and had our benefits cut. Those who attempted to gain promotions were informed that despite years of on-the-ground experience, an advanced degree in journalism was now required. I watched as my colleagues shelled out tens of thousands a year to obtain an MA for what they already knew how to do, often to lose their jobs anyway as the cuts continued. The recession viewed as temporary was in fact a transformative restructuring of the media economy. Outlets that had paid me $1,000 per article in the late 1990s dropped their rates to $200 by 2001, and eventually to zero, otherwise known as exposure. 15 years later, my ordinary life in 2000 New York is unthinkable. The 2015 version of me has no chance. Young workers are expected to work multiple unpaid internships, obtain exorbitantly expensive advanced degrees, and give their work away for the promise of opportunities that rarely arise. There are two types of people who tend to find themselves in this prestige economy: the rich and privileged, and the deluded and deeply in debt. Watching this dynamic played out, I left New York City in 2003 for good. What I didn't know is that I had traded one sinking ship for another. After quitting journalism, excuse me, I enrolled in a PhD program in anthropology. It's always good for laughs, which appealed to me because it allowed me to do the kind of in-depth research I could not do in the click-hungry world of media. I began my program in 2006. In 2008, the world economy collapsed, and the academic job market, always competitive, collapsed with it, with over 40% of jobs eliminated from my field, never to return. By the time I graduated in 2012, I'd produced 6 articles, 1 dissertation, and 2 children. But my prospects for a stable life in academia had disappeared. Almost no one in my department, one of the best ranked in the country, had found a tenure-track job since 2008. The majority were working as adjunct professors, making an average of $2,500 per course, an annual salary below the poverty line. Like my journalist friends writing for exposure, they had sacrificed their lives for a future they would never live. And so seeing that I was priced out of yet another profession, I left academia as well. As I struggled to figure out what to do, I talked to friends in other professions, policy, human rights, music, even law, and found they were experiencing the same thing. While credentials had never been so required or expensive, opportunities had never been so few. Unpaid and low-paid work was expected. Nowadays, people paid their dues literally, with cash. Jobs had become acts of charity to corporations. Workers subsidized employers that paid not with money, but with prestige. What many do not understand is that prestige is an empty commodity. In its original use, the word prestige meant trick, from a French word meaning deceit. Its origin is the Latin prestigum, a delusion or an illusion. Today, the illusion of prestige has deceived millions of Americans into working for free, or worse, paying to work. Prestige is the trick that keeps people believing choice exists, and that our present economic situation of exploitation and precariousness can be blamed on personal failure. This is a lie. In 2012, after receiving my PhD, I returned to journalism as a columnist for Al Jazeera, where I wrote a series of articles about life in the prestige economy. I began receiving a lot of attention and awards, but what few realize is that the reason I could write so convincingly about an America of eroded opportunity is that I was living in it. I turned down dozens of jobs, and I use that term loosely, from prestigious outlets that never offered enough money to feed my family, most located in cities like New York, unaffordable for anyone without pre-existing wealth. I got requests to write a book, but could never afford the childcare to pay for the time to write sample chapters for which I would not be financially compensated. What made it possible for me to survive, barely, as a writer, is that I lived as far away from the media world as one can get. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. You may have heard of it. It's a suburb of Ferguson. Out in flyover country, the living is cheaper, but life is still hard. This is particularly true for our creative class, and we do have one, despite what coastal elites may claim. In 2013, St. Louis Magazine named me one of the city's 15, quote, inspirational people under 35. They held an awards ceremony where I met another awardee, a rapper and artist, and we made plans to meet for coffee. The next day, we compared notes on our respective situations. My friend had done everything right. He'd gotten out of the rough neighborhood of East St. Louis where he grew up, got a college degree, and spent years winning award after award for his music and visual art. Despite this, however, he could barely pay his bills. He contemplated leaving his profession even as he was triumphing in it, as people simply refused to pay for the creative work he produced. He was expected to give it away, for the love of it, for the betterment of others, for the benefit of anyone but himself. I told him how Al Jazeera had not paid me in months, despite pleas for the money I needed to keep my family afloat. Al Jazeera did eventually pay me, but not until I had published several columns on economic despair in Al Jazeera that were partially inspired by my experience working for Al Jazeera. So there we were, two people in our 30s, looking to the world at the top of our game, privately struggling with success that came with no currency in every respect of the word. People in their 30s are dangerous. We're old enough to remember a functional economy, but too young to have actually benefited from it. We're the generation of eroded expectations that differentiate us from our younger peers who were locked out from the start, loaded with debt, baited with unpaid labor, and conditioned not to complain. Looking into the audience, I wonder how many of you are in the same position, perhaps afraid to speak out, to break the veneer of confidence and success, and to reveal the hardship beneath. I hope you'll consider discussing it openly. I realize that my somewhat depressing talk contradicts some of the optimism of earlier speakers. I think their message should be emphasized in the context of the grim situation I described. Like Roshana Jackson said earlier, you should believe in yourself. You should believe in yourself so much that you refuse to let people exploit you. You should believe in yourself so much that you recognize yourself and other people and fight on their behalf. You're not your job. You're how you treat people. Thank you.